everyone.
Good morning.
I want to welcome everyone here. My name is Congresswoman Karen Bass, and I represent a district in Los Angeles, and here I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the subcommittee on Africa, and I am glad and excited that this will be the second time that we have welcomed representatives from the Young African Leaders Initiative, which is now called the Mandela Scholars, and representing several countries on the continent of Africa. We had this opportunity last year, which I believe was the second year that the YALI students were here. They are in many different cities throughout the United States, but we were very fortunate to have 25 of them here at Howard University. And so we wanted them to address you today. We have a panel that they selected representing several different countries, and we have our moderator who will introduce the panel, and we will go ahead and get started. Before we begin, I wanted to welcome several members of Congress that are here today. Representative Barbara Lee, who is outside being interviewed right now, but I wanted to ask Representative Shaka Fattah if he would like to share a few words representing Philadelphia.
I'm here to listen and to learn, and the leadership of Karen Bass on the questions surrounding the continent and our work there, and to hear from these fellows. It's just a tremendous opportunity. So I look forward to giving way to the microphone to these future leaders and present leaders, actually, for the world and for Africa. Thank you.
And now I'd like to welcome Robin Kelly, Representative Robin Kelly from Chicago.
Good morning. I am thrilled and honored to be here. It's always so inspiring to be in a room full of young people. I hope you guys are having a productive, informative time here. And I noticed someone was from Cameroon. My family just did the swab and all of that, and that's where we found out that we came from. So I need to talk to you more. But anyway, I'm here to listen also and learn. You can never know enough about other people in other countries, so thank you so much. And thanks, Karen. She is the best.
I'd also like to acknowledge the leadership from Howard University that is here. Dr. Elsie Scott. Elsie, I just saw you a minute ago. The director of the Ronald Walters Center for Leadership. Dr. Lucinda Acquay, program manager. And Jerome Augusto, another program manager from Howard University. Where are you? Raise your hands, please. Thank you very much. The ambassador of Niger is here, Hassana Alidu. Could you please stand? Now we're going to go ahead and begin our program, and I want to introduce Beverly Kirk, who will be our moderator from CSIS. Start us off.
All right. Thank you, Congresswoman Bass, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Bethany Kirk, and I am a fellow and Deputy Director for Outreach for the International Security Program at CSIS, and I manage the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative there, and I am super excited to be here today. Thank you so much for welcoming us, Representative Bass, and planning this wonderful discussion on youth governance and leadership in Africa and the effect that they're going to have on the youth. This policy breakfast is very special. As the Congresswoman mentioned, we are joined by the Washington Mandela Fellows, and we also want to take a moment to welcome those of you who are watching this broadcast via our live web stream. Our audience today is a broad cross-section that includes people from think tanks, NGOs, academia, and of course the African Diplomatic Corps, and we have our panelists here. I also want to take a moment to just tell you about their fabulous background, so if you'll indulge me for a moment. Here to my immediate left is Mary Ashinya from Ghana. She works with the Ghana Health Service as a sub-district leader. She's a member of the Regional Health Quality Improvement Team, a member of the Regional Focus for Accidents and Emergency Services, an executive member of the Ghana Medical Association, the Volta District, and medical superintendent of the Volta region. She's currently finishing up a master's in public health from the University of Ghana, and she hopes to network and further build capacity during her fellowship to contribute to the health of Ghana's general population. So welcome, Mary. Next to her is Ronnie Gumby from South Africa. He is currently a member of the provincial legislature in KwaZulu-Natal. He is a spokesperson for human settlements and sports and recreation and is a former elected city councilor. He has worked extensively in various communications roles for the Democratic Alliance, which is the official political party to which he belongs. It is the official opposition. And after his fellowship here in Washington, he would like to begin a housing project focused on environmentally friendly, sustainable, and alternative housing materials and technology to change perceptions in society. Welcome. Next to him is Pamela Kenora from Tanzania. She has more than 6 years' experience in democratic governance and elections on the continent, and she is currently involved in African Union election observation missions as a long-term observer and elections expert. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and is currently pursuing a Master of Arts in International Cooperation and Development from the University of Fernando Pessoa, Open University of Tanzania. And following her fellowship here in Washington, she plans to continue her work as an elections observer and pioneer a youth-based non-governmental organization in Tanzania to promote democratic governance, human rights, and youth political participation. Welcome. Next to her is Dr. Eric Bassam from Cameroon, and he is currently District Medical Officer for the Ray Buba Health District, where he manages all of the health programs and projects, and he's Chief Medical Officer at the District Hospital. He has a medical degree from the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, and is currently taking an online master's course in public health. And when he returns, he plans to share his knowledge by organizing capacity building seminars, and long-term, he hopes to set up his own humanitarian NGO, which will focus primarily on providing quality health care to the underprivileged. Welcome.
Thank you.
And next to him is Kennedy Mwika from Kenya. He has nearly 4 years' experience in macroeconomic policy advocacy and LGBT rights activism in Kenya. He is currently an organizer for the Kenya Tax Justice Initiative, where he focuses on advocacy and lobbying efforts to remodel that country's tax policy to favor economically marginalized groups. He volunteers at the Mayubi Collective, an Africa-wide advocacy group focusing on LGBTIQ rights on the continent. He's in his final year of law school at Kenyatta University in Nairobi, and following his time here in Washington, he plans to continue his work in gender equality and LGBTIQ rights research. So welcome everyone with a round of applause. I want to start out with our panel with questions about elections and youth. There are going to be more than 20 elections happening across the African continent over the next couple of years. What role do you think young people in Africa will play in this elections process? And Mary, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Beverly. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to speak for Ghana because that's what I know. I'm not as privileged as Pamela, who has an African experience. For elections in Ghana, the last time we had our elections was in 2012. That was quite eventful and very interesting. I could say that in Ghana, democracy is quite, we are committed to democracy. The opposition party lost the election in 2012. They went to the High Court, they filed a petition, and the Supreme Court ruled that the results should be accepted. I think that Ghanaians took it in good faith. It's also worth noting that the flag bearer of this opposition party had just run his second term, and is also seeking to run a third term for elections. So for Ghana, we are expecting a very interesting competition between the main ruling party, the NDC, and the opposition party, the NPP. That's what I have to say for Ghana. Then, considering the role that young people could play in these coming elections next year, so many civil society groups have started springing up in Ghana. The very popular one is what we call Occupy Ghana. It was formed by one Yali fellow who is in Notre Dame now, and his colleague lawyers who started advocating for transparency in governance, fighting corruption, filing petitions in the courts against government officials who indulge in corruption. And so I think that the government of Ghana right now is very much aware and awake that the young people in Ghana are watching, and that also serves as a security net. So the other way that young people in Ghana could contribute to very democratic elections is through community governance in all disciplines, in education, in agriculture, in health. And I think that Ghana is also serving as an example to its colleagues in the West African region in ensuring that this democracy is well spread across the West African countries. So that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and welcome to everybody. I think young people are going to play a critical role, especially around social media. So many young people are far more connected to social media, to Facebook, to Twitter, and information is getting out there more and more often, and so society is becoming far more transparent, allowing them easier access to both participating in the political process and also influencing the political process. Africa is also a very young country, so there's many young people who are very unemployed, often very unemployed, and so that becomes a central message to the politics and the offers which political parties make to them. That's both in my experience in South Africa, and I'm sure it's the experience of many of my other colleagues on the program. In South Africa, you know, I've seen a shift in political parties campaigning a lot more in your tertiary institutions. So they're making a lot more investments in connecting with voters on tertiary institutions and campuses. And you will notice that they try to provide support even to students who seem to be connected to political parties in a way. And so that's them trying to say that, well, these are the future people who become decision makers, and how do we connect with them now before they're even registered, so that by the time that they end up registering and voting and taking part in the process, they're involved. Also, young people have an ability, especially as generations continue, to be far more forward-thinking, far more focused on the future, and less focused on history. Now, history plays a massive part in politics, but the ability of young people to take that history into a context of which, how do we make tomorrow better, as opposed to some of our parents who often more battle, you know, to maneuver around those ideas. So that's where I think the space in which young people are in, they're the majority ultimately, and so with all these tools and with all that focus coming towards them, is to make it better. Now in South Africa, we've got a fairly stable political system. When we talk about 20 elections coming up, the next 20 elections depends on how political parties accept democratic outcomes, and how whether a political party can change in terms of becoming the governing party and the opposition party freely. There's no violence, there's no intimidation, and there becomes a culture where we accept that. Now, I don't like the idea of branding Africa as to say that there is undemocratic practices and that is Africa. When we don't even talk about America, we talk about the United States of America, we talk about Mexico, and in Africa it's exactly the same thing. You've got many different countries. In some places there's progress, in some places there isn't progress. And it was one of the key lessons, for instance, from a talk we went to at the Wilson Center, where this really came out strongly, because in South Africa, I see progress. We see institutions strengthening. In some places, perhaps such as Burundi, they might not be that progress, it might be going backwards. So we must be careful of the branding of Africa as just the simple continent where one thing is going on. Thank you.
Pamela?
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and I would love to share my insights on the question asked. Over the first, about 5-6 years, we see a new trend in Africa, where young people are getting more involved in issues of democracy and elections compared to how it was in the past. But this trend has two sides, I would rather say. The young people who are getting involved are either involved directly through being candidates, and we have those ones who are in as taking opportunity for representative democracy. But there is another phase to it. We have electoral-based conflicts across Africa. And who are the culprits? It's the young people. The youth are put in the front line. They are the ones who suffer the consequences of these conflicts because of the few leaders that we have. We are many in numbers, we have to realize and we have to understand. It's a young population, about 65% of the African population is young people. So it's really quite vital to encourage for CSOs, for other NGOs, to ensure that we have meaningful and effective youth participation. And on the other side, we have a group of young people who don't believe in elections because they say there is rigging, there is no credibility. But there is need to understand even one vote counts. They should come out in numbers, they should register, they should vote and be part of the process because that is how decision making is made in a democratic society. I will move further and look at it on the other hand. Some young people get opportunities in political spaces, but for what reasons? Do we get opportunities to make change within our communities, to make change within our continent, or is it a question of survival? That it is how one can make money, one can survive, or it is to see Africa prosper. And once we get into the spaces, there comes a question of taking over. Young people, this is what makes those leaders in power be a bit, it becomes a little difficult to share the spaces because once young people get inside, they want to believe they cannot work with those who have been there. While it is really quite vital to understand where you come from is very important, history is important, the people who have been in power you cannot forget because they have an understanding of how things have been done. So when there is room for cooperation between the younger generation, which gets into political spaces, and those who have already been there, I believe we'll be able to achieve the things that we want. And one last thing I wish to say, our leaders in power is quite very, very important to prepare successors. Because the moment they get out of the office, we need to have young people who have the culture within them, understanding where we really want to go. That way we will not be starting afresh. Thank you.
Good morning again, everybody. I'll start by saying that a government without youth is no government, which means that a government without youth, there is no democracy. But how many of us youth know are important, the role we are supposed to play in democracy? More than 70% of the populations, African populations, are youths. But at the same time, only 1/3 of these youths are educated. For the males, and for the females, not only over 1/4 of the females are educated. So how do we get these youths to understand that? How do our governments get these youths to understand that? They are role to play if they are not educated. So our government has to provide, put in systems and programs which favors youths to get educated. Because when they get educated, they know their rights of voting. And if youths don't vote, what becomes the result of elections? 60% of the population, African populations, is being made up of youths. So if we don't vote, what type of democratic process are we fighting for? So our government have to put in programs to train us to be engaged in our electoral processes. They have to put in programs to make us to feel that we are part of the decision making of democracy, of policies in our country. As for the case of Cameroon, it's true that we have a president who has been there for long. Everybody knows that. But at the same time, it's also an important question to ask. Is everybody involved in the electoral process? Because there was a time where you think that they lost trust in the opposition party because they were in-house fighting a lot. So how can you trust people who don't trust themselves? So in Cameroon, I think we are making a progress because we had our last presidential election was biometric, which is a good progress. I'm not a member of an electoral commission, but I know that it's a good progress with respect to the appraisals we receive from independent monitors. We also have the formation of the National Youth Council, which is being led by a Mandela Washington Fellow. He was here last year, which is there to train the youth, to make the youth know their rights and their importance in participating in the electoral process. I believe that if all African countries could have a vision of making youths know their right to participate in the electoral processes, then we are going to move a step or more steps further to a better democracy. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The good thing about being on this panel, being on this other side, is that I get to, hear out all my other fellows because they have really good points, and I think they have more intelligence and more experience than I. But I mean, a few points about Kenya when it comes to young people is that we've had a very tumultuous history. You guys know about the 2008-2009 election violence, and as Pamela noted, that youth are usually the ones who are mobilized when it comes to violent outcomes in elections. And the only reason I can come up with for why this happens is that because youth are a reservoir for change. They're the promise of the future, they're the momentum of the present. And what's been going on in Africa for some time now is that it's the ace up someone's sleeve, so that someone knows, like, if I lose an election, I always have my youth somewhere in my corner who will come and, fight for me. And I think that needs to be changed. That needs to change in Africa. It started changing in Kenya after the 2008 election. We've come up with robust youth policies in the country. We have a new constitution which is very youth oriented and youth centric. Young people in Kenya right now have easier access to government grants, to open businesses, to go to school, and so on and so forth. And this is, I mean, more projects keep rolling out in Kenya. Right now, the government has initiated basically the US version of, the Kenyan version of the US Peace Corps. But what they do in Kenya is that they're known as National Youth Service. What they do in Kenya, they're an integral part of urban development right now. They do a lot of community service, a lot of communities and civic engagement, and I think that's a good thing. But then again, more needs to be done, as Eric has, as Bassam has said. Young people are extremely disillusioned in African countries. We don't vote. We don't engage in civic, in local government or even in high levels of government. We don't influence policy in a fundamental way. And I think one of the good things about the Mandela Washington Fellowship is that it positions the fellows. Once we go back to our home countries, how can we integrate ourselves into state making and state running, or even because there are people on other tracks such as business and civic engagement. And I think that's an important factor of this fellowship. For me, I'm very optimistic about the place of young people in Africa. I mean, if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here on the Mandela Fellowship. I would have been, why do I need to apply? And when I go back to my country, I can't do anything. So, yeah, for me, youth and elections, all I can see is positive outcomes. We have problems along the way. You have people who want to go for an extra term. It's always about that extra term in Africa. Because like if you get that one, that means you can be there for life. And we need young people to be on the front line of asking questions like, do you really need that third term when so many of us are ready and willing to lead? So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kennedy. Before we go to the next question, I have a specific question for you, Khalilani. Mary, you had a follow-up comment that you wanted to make about youth.
Thank you very much, Beverly. Just to add quickly that other ways that youth could contribute to democratic elections and governance in Africa, learning from Ghana, I think that in Africa usually the problem is the trust between the citizens and government. And one way that youth have been able to bridge this gap is by educating the community members about electoral processes, how decisions are made, how policies are formulated, because sometimes conflicts arise because people don't really know what goes into decision making and there isn't enough transparency. Then also youth have been able to engage in effective dialogue between government officials. Instead of going on very violent demonstrations, there are other more peaceful conflict resolution strategies that youth in my country have used. One other strategy that is also springing up is identifying influential people in society and using them to mobilize the community members. For instance, in my country now, celebrities are not only seen as people who should entertain the general public because they are very influential people. We have been able to use celebrities to mobilize community members, the very influential celebrities, and these are people who lead community members to ask for more transparency from government officials. That is what I have to say in addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Halilani, you brought up the issue of social media, and I wanted to follow up on that in terms of the impact that you think it's having on engagement in terms of getting youth more involved. We heard Kennedy speak to the disillusionment of youth in Africa. Can social media, do you see it being an agent for change in getting more young people to engage in the political process, since you were saying that more people are using it in the campaigns, at least in South Africa?
Absolutely. I do think it's assisting because, one, social media assists you to send out messages rapidly about what is going on and about even on activities that are happening on the ground. So the fact that a political leader can have 1 million followers or even 500,000 followers, I'm talking our countries are probably a lot smaller than the States, and can talk about an activity which is happening in their area and how he or she will be there. And it's easy for young people then to both express their views on it. At the same time, it's easy for them to find out so that they can be able to attend, to go there, and that in itself is taking part in the process. My former party leader was at times seen to be controversial on social media. So she found it as the most authentic way in which she could communicate. And sometimes she got into trouble here and there by things which perhaps might not be expressed in the same way which she wanted it expressed, just because of the small amount of characters. But that there often caused a lot of engagements between her and young people, and she would respond directly via social media. It could result in perhaps even her saying something and later apologizing about it and saying that, well, you know, maybe I was wrong. And that's young people who've forced a particular way and a particular view of the world amongst the political system. So, I mean, that there on its own is massive.
Mm-hmm. Kennedy, you brought up the issue of disillusionment. Do you think that a more active engagement of young people via social media is maybe one way of lessening that disillusionment in the political process?
Yeah, definitely. In Kenya, we're seeing more and more leaders coming into social media and engaging with the youth directly. But at the end of the day, government is big, the state is large, and it's sprawling, and sometimes youth find that it's very difficult to engage with this large and sprawling entity. And I feel like social media is only one aspect of engaging with leaders online, but what we haven't been talking about is information. When I left high school, I joined all kinds of social media pages. I got very active and involved with my friends at first. And then when I started getting into causes, into political causes, into social causes, I was like, I can engage, yes, but at the end of the day, I still need information. to work with. I still need to know what am I talking about. When I go and ask a politician online or Representative Bass, what's your view on foster care? If I don't know what foster care in my own area is, that I can't make any effective engagement, to be honest. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Eric, you brought up the issue of education and how it's key. In prepping for today's panel, I read where the illiteracy rate in some African countries is in the high double digits. What needs to happen to counter that in terms of getting youth engaged in the political process and ultimately in issues of governance? Because if you don't have an education, it's hard to participate.
Thank you. What needs to be done to counter that? I told you earlier, in Cameroon we have the National Youth Council, which is doing a big job in countering such illiteracy rates by the youth. So it's not just that, the government also has to create institutions and give youth the opportunity of learning what is wrong with their country or what is wrong with our continent from the African perspective, so that we come out to look for solutions for those problems. So education is very important. It's a bottom line for everything. If you are not educated, it means you are not a skill level, and most leadership positions demand that you should be skilled to get a leadership position. So it is very, very vital that we spread the word about youth getting educated. It's very important. Thank you.
And Pamela, I see you feverishly writing notes there. Would you like to follow up?
Yes. I'd like to add my voice to what Eric has been saying. Civic and voter education in particular is very, very vital. This, in most African countries, is the role of the electoral management bodies. And it is actually, election is a whole cycle. It has an electoral cycle, but most of the time it's done a few months to the election day, and the countries are huge and massive, while at the same time this is very vital to make sure that we inculcate the culture of democracy among young people, so they understand why they have to vote, why their vote counts, that voting is how we put the leaders we want in place. And a challenge to that is most of this role is taken up by political parties. So you find that it is actually partisan voter education. So this way, most young people, like they said, we have an issue. An issue in Africa, we don't really read. We don't really read. We listen to what we hear. The culture of reading a lot and trying to understand things a lot is not really, really there. So when it comes to partisan voter education, then people make choices which are not really informed, but because they're influenced by the political parties. So we keep having the same people in power. They will keep running year after year.
Halalani and then Eric.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, it's very, very important, and particularly in being able to get women part of the process as well, because in some countries, women are not regarded at times to be, as a culture, not worthy of the education that men receive. And to be able to bring them part of that process, we need to get our literacy rates up. We need to make sure that we create international citizens, so people who are not only able to compete within their own countries, but compete globally. And as well, I mean, democratic governance and processes are becoming more and more sophisticated. And the more sophisticated they become, the more you want a highly educated populace, because the more educated, often they tend to become more connected and more able to take part in the process. I think that's important.
All right. Eric and then Mary.
I was about to talk about women empowerment. Yeah, because exactly, because
it's very important.
It's very important.
The Smart Women, Smart Power initiative at CSIS.
Exactly, it's very important because even the world is made up mostly of youths, and the greater percentage of the youths are women. Are women, you know. So it's very important to empower these women, and I think it's high time. In some African countries, this what is known as constitutional quota. You know, like
30% of parliamentarians are supposed to be women. It's high time we remove those faces and give the opportunity, equal rights for all women to vie in for all the posts, even if it is 80% who are women. Is there any problem? I don't think there's a problem. So.
For those of you listening online, Representative Bass just said that that needs to happen in Congress because only 17% of Congress here in the United States is women. Mary?
Okay, thank you. I'm also passionate about women empowerment. But my take is that very often than not, when we talk about women empowerment, people only consider economic empowerment of women. But I think in Africa, we have to look at the context because we too much focus on the content than the context. In Africa, we have a special socio-economical, social-cultural context in which women should be empowered. Because you have women who are economically empowered, these are high professionals, but they still can't take basic decisions regarding what they want to do with their lives because they have to wait for their husbands. And these are doctors, lawyers, big-time business women. They are economically empowered, but the social cultural context does not allow them to exhibit that empowerment. So this is one aspect that we should be looking at when we talk about empowerment of women. I also want us to note that social media is great, as Gumby has said, and my other colleagues. We also, as young people, have to guard against the negative impact of social media, because very often than not, young people have been quite subjective instead of being objective with social media. They take bribes from political decision makers, and then they go on social media and give out very false information that, you know, spices up a lot of conflict in our communities. So let's use social media very well. And my last comment, which is a big deal in Ghana now, it's about the quality of people who go into politics. And there was this funny joke about in primary school, the great brains go into medicine, then the less brains go into politics and become the ruler. It's quite a sensitive joke. But then okay, sorry. But this is a big thing on the agenda of Ghana now that is being discussed among young people, and I'm sure it's cross-cutting across Africa. Young people who are technocrats need to get into the inner circle where decisions are made. I was happy when we had a visit to the capital the last time, and we were told that there was criteria to be a Senate. One of them was that it should be at least 30 years. Yeah, but back in Africa, we don't have any criteria. Yeah, people just start getting loud on radio, and then before you realize they're joining one political party, they are standing to be members of parliament. Before you realize they are in parliament, they have no idea what evidence they should use to take decisions. And they only think about the short-term impact of whatever decision they are making. They don't think about the future consequences when they are not there, what impact it will have on the younger generations. So I think that young people who are technocrats should find their way into the inner circle where decisions are made, because those policies affect a larger broad than small communities that we interact with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I want to tell you all that we will get to audience questions, so think about what you want to ask our panel of fellows. And I get one more round of questions here. But before I do that, these are only 5 of the Yali Fellows. There are, I believe, 25 more, and many of them are here in the room, and I'd like to ask them to stand so that they can be acknowledged and welcomed as well. Thank you so much. This is going to be my last question to toss out to you before we open it up to everyone else here in the audience to ask questions. I'm curious about how what you're learning here in Washington is going to impact what you do when you return home. During the introduction, I gave a brief synopsis of what you hope to do when you return. But I'm looking for answers from you about what you've learned so far and what you're hoping to learn and how you want that to impact the areas of youth and governance and leadership, because we've touched on that, and we'll get further into it, I'm sure, with the audience questions. But if some of you could give me your thoughts on those things. We'll go in reverse order. We're going to start with Kennedy. You thought you were going to get to wait again. I was paying attention when you said that.
Yes, thank you, Beverly. So what have I learned so far? The U.S., I've had so much access, and all the fellows have had so much access while we were here. We've met high-profile State Department officials, guys from Congress, and also we've been able to do a lot of civic engagement. So I think so far the biggest thing I've learned is how to effectively engage at the local level. I've worked in the tax justice movement back home, but what I've done mostly is go to the grassroots, as it were, so talk directly with citizens who are disenfranchised, who are alienated from the economic systems in Kenya. And what that has meant so far is that I haven't, in Kenya, I actually don't go and sit down with politicians or local government officials and we talk about, how certain policies are affecting the people in this politicians' area. So I think that's the biggest lesson I'm learning so far. Towards the future, I work with the LGBT community in Kenya, and another thing is just to, have contacts, learn how the US has done it. Recently, you've had this big decision on same-sex marriage. Also, you've had so many decisions especially by this administration, regarding discrimination in the workplace, regarding hate crime legislation, and I think that's a very positive step for the U.S. And I think the world is ready and willing to learn from the U.S. about how do you make these things work. It's been a very long road. You guys know about the human rights situation for minorities in Africa. It's changing in some countries, but in most, it's actually going the other way. It's regressing. And the thing I want to learn is, how do you guys do it? Yeah. But so far, it's been a great learning experience, by and large. Thank you.
Eric?
Thank you again for this question. Generally, America is being viewed as, I don't want to say the best nation in the world. I'll say one of the best nations in the world. So